9 Fun in the Asteroid Belt. Spira Bridge Year 3, Day 50, 1250. Sinara and Nikita Aronov were manning the 2 science stations and studying the energy signatures on the sensors. At the same time, Major Levine was plotting a course past all the asteroids on their list. He was also looking for a place where they could take a closer look at the sources of the signals. So far, they had been able to confirm that said sources were Zavaris obelisks. These units were much smaller than the one on Eden. But they had not been able to find a place where they could send a team in spacesuits yet. The asteroids they had passed so far had been barren, except for the alien devices. "Anything so far?" Haley asked. "No," Sinara began, "but every asteroid is slightly bigger than the one before." "That lines up with our practice theory," Levine said. Suddenly, there was a beep from Aronov's console. He worked his controls and realized that one of the asteroids was not solid. Instead, there was a cave system inside. And the Zavaris had made the asteroid spin so that centrifugal force simulated gravity. This created 0.9 G inside the caves, but there was no atmosphere inside these caves. Aronov reported what he had found to Haley. "Is the obelisk inside the caves?" "Yes, it is," Aronov said. "If I'm reading this right, in the exact center, Colonel." "I'm still getting used to that," Haley said with a smile. "Can we get a team in there for a closer look?" "There are no hatches sealing the ends of the cave system, so we should be able to get in there." Aronov turned his chair around. "And I think I've found a good place to park the ship while the team is inside." "Major Levine, set a course." "Yes, ma'am." Spira set course for the asteroid. She was moving at full sublight speed, so it only took her a minute to arrive. Aronov transferred the coordinates to Levine's station, and the Major parked the ship in that location. As soon as he reported that they were in position, Haley decided that she would lead the team herself. "So, who is going down there?" Haley looked at the asteroid and made the decision. Puddle Jumper 2, Cockpit Year 3, Day 50, 1235. Vale flew the jumper away from the obelisk. Next to him, Cadman was watching the temperate belt below them. "Tilda, I should have checked if she received the gene therapy." Tilda, of course, if the answer was no, then Dr. Bennett could fix that. In order to keep the silence from getting awkward, Vale decided to speak up. "So, I know this is a cliché question," he began. "But why did you join this expedition? I read your file and you had a pretty sweet gig aboard the George Hammond. You had your own security team." "And now I have my own security team again. I've come full circle," Cadman said with a smile. "But you're right, life on the Hammond was good. Still, when Colonel Young asked me, I couldn't say no. We don't leave our people behind." "Exactly." "Speaking of clichés, have you had the gene therapy yet?" "No," Cadman said. "It was on my to-do list while I was assigned to Atlantis, and then I got reassigned." She paused. "And what about you, sir? Did you get the therapy or were you born with the gene?" "I got it from Mother Nature, and both of my parents, just like Lieutenant Colonel Shepard." There was a beep from the sensors as they detected 2 cabins on the surface. They came with a pier, canoes and a steam vessel identical to the one they had found next to the cabins that had been next to Obelisk. Vale told the jumper to make a note, which it did. "Anyway, we should fix that. Get you the gene and then some flying lessons in one of the beauties." "Yes, sir," Cadman paused. "You know, it's been weeks since we've left Freedom Prime. How come we haven't had this conversation?" Maybe we're both workaholics." "Maybe," Cadman said with a snicker. "So, is true that you used to be a Roman centurion?" "Yes, it is. And don't believe any of the romanticized things Hollywood tried to tell you were the truth. The legions were brutal, and so was I." "I get what you're saying, but I've been in the uniform long enough to know that modern politicians, admiral and generals, are far from having clean hands themselves. And don't get me started on all the cloak and dagger games played by intelligence services. She paused. So, there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around. I like working for a boss who tries to avoid it. Thank you, and I can't promise I'll always succeed. Before Cadman could reply, the sensors beeped as they passed over another cabin complex. She made a note on the map and noticed something. They appeared to be equally spaced around the planet. She grabbed her backpack and took out an electronic pad, which she connected to the controls. Then she keyed in several commands, which made several green dots appear on the plotter display. The complexes they had already passed over were blue dots. Got something. I think they are placed at 36-degree intervals, Cadman said, providing the whole planet with a basic safety net for any order ship in trouble. But only one has an obelisk. Vale had an idea. Let go take a closer look. He increased speed as he took them towards the next cabin complex. It was time for them to find some answers. Spira Jumper Bay Year 3, Day 50, 1300. The outer door to the Jumper Bay opened, revealing the asteroid that they had codenamed Tango 1. Haley had picked 3 people to come along with her, while leaving Major Levine in charge of the Spira. Nikita Aronov was coming along to cover the archaeological angle, while Carl Grogan was the security officer for the mission. Alec Carlson was off-world, but Xander Henderson was an electrician and had a degree in computer science. We didn't make him chief of maintenance for nothing. So he was in the 4th suit. Okay, people, Haley began. Here we go. Haley jumped through the door, with the others following. Because of the gravity conditions, namely, the fact that there was nearly none, they sailed towards Tango 1 slowly. The suits came with thrusters, so they were able to control their descent with those if the situation called for it. But the landing ended up being soft and easy. Welcome to Tango 1, Haley said. The walls of these caves are relatively smooth, Henderson said, and they're stone slabs on the floor. The walls are natural, but the floor was clearly made or carved by the Zavaris, Aronov added. Of course, considering that this whole asteroid was built, the concept of natural is a bit flexible. They pointed to a section of the call, where an arrow was carved into the stone. And I think those are for people who don't have the benefit of Spira's sensors. They probably lead right to the obelisk, boss. Let's test that theory. They followed the arrow and found another one. Soon, they were approaching the heart of the asteroid. It was a large cave that came with stalactites and stalagmites. There was a carved path that ended in a circle, with the obelisk in the middle. As she walked around the obelisk, Haley saw that the path they had used to enter was not the only one. There were 3 more paths heading into the asteroid. While Aronov and Henderson set to studying the obelisk, Grogan also noticed the other passages. Why more than one access point? He asked. Sergeant, Doctor, stay here and study our alien friend, Haley said. Grogan, let's see if we can find the answer to your question. Yes, ma'am, Grogan said. Studying the obelisk it is, Henderson said. Grogan and Haley left, leaving Henderson and Aronov with the obelisk. Aronov let Henderson take the lead. Back in the early days of the expedition, he had asked Henderson what exactly a chief of maintenance did. Spira had several ICT personnel aboard and a small team of electricians. There were also 2 crew members that took care of the laundry. Finally, the ship was self-cleaning. But if there had been a janitorial staff, they would have also reported to Henderson. It's people like this that keep the ship afloat. That was a lesson Nikita had learned from his father. Ivan Aronov had been a sailor in the Russian Navy. He had retired with the rank of senior midshman, which was the highest enlisted rank possible. Getting him and Nicholas Rush's father together could have been interesting. Alas, Rush Sr. had passed, and Ivan didn't have the proper security clearance. Which was fine with Nikita, because his father hated keeping secrets from the love of his life, Natasha. Natasha was the one who had gotten him interested in archaeology. Her father, Boris, had been a history teacher who had taken up archaeology as a hobby. After seeing his notes and artifacts, Nikita had ended up picking up the torch. His grandfather had passed away several years after that, but not before announcing that he was extremely proud of his grandson. Well, Grandpa, I could use your help on this one. He smiled at the sergeant and they set to work. Moon 1 Grassy Field Year 3, Day 50, 12:52. Coulson was drawing a schematic. He and Porter had been studying the order circuits. It turned out there were 10 of them, with one of them being the big red button Tzalo had suggested. The other 9 were some kind of short-range transceivers. But the question was, where did they transmit to and from? Suddenly, there was a beep from the console. Jial was standing next to the alcove. He looked at the circuits and saw that there was small display about the keyboard, and that display was now activate. Colonels, where are you? I'm in an order cabin. It turns out there are sets of them at 36 degrees intervals. So, 10 sets of cabins in total, Jial paused. That makes sense with what Porter and Coulson have discovered here. Allison, we need somebody to do the technobabble. And that certainly isn't me, Jial thought. Porter took over and began explaining what they had learned. Tango 1 Tunnel Year 3, Day 50, 13:08. They had reached the end of the first tunnel. It ended in a large, round chamber with a circle of light embedded in the walls. Grogan looked up and saw that the room was a metal door, which reminded him of the iris on Earth's Stargate. Why wasn't there a door like that in the tunnel we used to get in? He looked around, but there was no sign of any controls for the door. Still, it was clear that this was meant for people who arrived by spaceship. Well, that's one, Grogan said. Why wasn't there a door in the tunnel we used? Haley asked. If you want to pressurize this place, you need to close all the passages. Yeah, I thought about that. We can take a closer look later for now. Grogan stopped because he spotted something. He had been taking a closer look at the walls. I'm thinking we should. He knocked on a section of wall which sounded hollow. He noticed that this part was totally smooth. Try this. He felt an outline and pushed. There was a grinding noise and then the section slid aside. Door and the corridor beyond. Lead the way. Grogan led the way into the corridor. It passed a small control room, which had a single chair that faced a wall full of buttons, switches, and displays. There was a thick layer of dust on all of them. Grogan stepped into the control room and cleared some of the dust. The markings on the buttons were not Savaris, suggesting that this was a later addition by somebody else. And not the order of the other either. Just what we need, another alien species to deal with. He took out a camera and took a photo of the controls. Then he zoomed in on the clean section and took another. That done, he continued down the corridor. Moon 1 Grassy Field Year 3, Day 50, 13:17. Jumper 2 had returned to the obelisk. The others were putting the supplies and equipment back in the jumper, while Vale was taking a closer look at the controls that Coulson and Porter had found. 9 short-range transceivers, which tap into the long-range transceiver that uses the obelisk as a booster. Besides allowing the transmission of a distress call, this also allowed for communications between the cabins. Which we saw firsthand. But he wanted to check if there was just one long-range channel. He hit several keys and a short list appeared. It had 3 channels. One was the distress channel, but the other 2 were locations in this solar system. Both in the asteroid belt. He took out a paper note block and made some notes. Then he closed the panel and headed for the puddle jumper. He sat down behind the controls and seconds later, the ship took off. This time, the trip through the atmosphere was shorter. On their way in, he had taken them down slowly so that they could get a good look at the moon below them. But that was not a consideration this time around. As soon as they reached space, he realized that Spira was not there anymore. Fortunately, a scan quickly revealed that the ship was nearby. In the asteroid belt, and he focused, and the display zoomed in. and realized that Spira was at one of locations he had just identified. "Looks like they are having some fun in the asteroid belt," Cadman said. "It's a short hop," Vale said. "At full sublight we'll be there in about 10 minutes. "You think that asteroid might be a Zavaris construct as well?" Coulson asked. Vale nodded. He knew that Moon 1 had given them a starting place, and now the asteroid belt might provide them with the next piece of the puzzle. Tilda, and as always, there is only one way to find out. Tilda, so he set course for Spira and pushed the engines to maximum, 10 and games in town. H2Z 118 Village of PAL Year 3, Day 12, 1015. Scott had introduced his team, and then GA 25H had given them a tour of the village. It was indeed a collection of farms, but one building a large barn had been turned into a large still. GA 25H had explained that this was an official government still, and that soldiers were not allowed to go there, because the political leadership was afraid that they would get drunk and go around looting, raping, and murdering. So they had authorized the still crews do what was necessary to deal with any violators. GA 25H was now leading them into the lab next to the still. This was where they tried to refine and improve their product. There was also a table with 8 chairs. The lab doubled as an office and town meeting hall. They all sat down, with GA 25H sitting across from Scott. "So, Matt," he began, "may I call you Matt?" "Only if I can call you GA," Scott said with a smile. "GA is fine with me. Now, Matt, our security sensors have detected your second team already. So would you please ask Commander Young to bring his team into the town?" Scott to Young. =/ Young here. We're holding position outside the town. Are you okay? =/ Yes, sir. The locals have extended an invitation, sir. Scott paused. I think it would be best if you took them up on it. These people are friendly, sir. There was silence as Young considered his next move. H2Z 118 Dry Creek Bed Year 3, Day 12, 1015. The medical team had arrived and treated the wounded. The bulk of that team had left heading back to base with their security officers staying behind to reinforce Dr. 20AT's patrol. The base had also sent out another patrol to back them up, but the aliens were already making their move. A second team had circled around the patrol and was now entering the town from the other side. The problem was that he would have to wait for his reinforcements to make his move. Tilda, of course, I still have to figure out a way to get them out of there. Tilda, he wanted to capture the aliens, learn about them. But if he went into a town with a hive official still or host, as it was officially called, his superiors would come down on him and his men like a ton of construction material. Tilda Host. Who came up with that name anyway? Tilda, it sounded like something from a badly written piece of fan fiction. On the other hand, the stills served an important function. The booze they produced was shipped throughout Hal'Iry space. It was divided into rations that were given to the civilian population by means of lottery. The lottery was part of several measures that the higher-ups had taken to prevent dissension in the ranks. For now, however, Dr. 20AT had other things on his mind. He needed to come up with a plan to get the aliens out of PAL, so he kept watching. H2Z 118 Village of PAL Year 3, Day 12, 1022. Young, Scott, and GA 25H were sitting in the lab/meeting hall, while most of the others, led by Lieutenant James, were outside and keeping a close eye on the Hal'Iry team just outside the town. The only exception was TJ, who was talking to one of the locals, MZ-10X. There was a still aboard the chaser, which could make medical alcohol. But stills could also be used to distill water. And while the one aboard ship was big enough for ship's alcohol needs, medical or otherwise, it was not big enough to provide a supply of distilled water. The PAL still, however, would be able to provide them with several bottles of the stuff. So, Commander, GA 25H began, we are in major trouble here. The Hal'Iry are not tolerant of other species. In fact, if it was up to our political leaders, we would conquer the universe and wipe out everybody not part of the hive. He paused. The only reason we haven't is because we lack the numbers and resources. Why are you telling us this? Because I became the leader of a host for a reason, he leaned back. Namely, that I am not the biggest fan of our political leadership, and most of the supreme commanders are fools. Villages like Pal had certain liberties that the average settlements lack. If you had entered a normal village, you would have been executed by now. Which brings up to the subject of the patrol outside the town limits. So going further from the Stargate, Scott said, would be a real bad. They will either kill you, capture you, or both, Ga 25H said. And if they find out how to work the Stargate, it would be bad, and not just for you. Because if we go to war, thousands of my species will die. Not to mention all the people who will lose their loved ones. And that's just our side. Young turned to Scott. Lieutenant, can we talk outside? Yes, sir, Scott said. The two of them walked out of the building. As soon as they were out of ear range, Young turned to Scott. So, do you believe him? Because to me, this whole sounds way too lucky. A whole planet full of hostiles, and we happen to stumble upon the one friendly town in walking range of the gate. I know we are taking a risk by believing him, but if the Hal'Iry really are a predatory species, and they figure out how to work the gate. Young nodded. That would be really bad, Scott thought, and he got the impression that Ga 25H was a straight shooter. Besides, if he had wanted to hurt them, he could have done so before. Instead, he had given them a tour of the town and kept the ground forces at bay. And Colonel Young was not the kind to gamble with the future of a species or a galaxy. Okay, Young said. Back to the ship it is. Before Scott could reply, Varro came running. Colonel, we have a problem, he began. Our alien friends are setting up some kind of grenade launcher. I think they are done waiting. 2 seconds later, the enemy opened fire. H2Z 118 Dry Creek Bed Year 3, Day 12, 1025. Dr. 28 watched as another grenade hit and exploded. He had wanted to wait a bit longer, but his superiors had called him and demanded that he should move in now. They had also wanted the aliens alive. Apparently, they knew something about the aliens' rings. Fortunately, they had several smelly bombs at their disposal. They had just fired all 8 of them into Pal. Of course, these things are designed to work against Hal'Iry. Not aliens, His troops were covering both paths from the town. As soon as the aliens left the cover of the buildings, they would be stunned and taken away, and they would have no other choice. The bombs had made the air impossible, or near impossible, to breathe. Dr. 28 gave his troops hand signals and then readied his weapon. Several more seconds passed and then, nothing happened. What the he gave it 20 more seconds, then ordered his men to open fire. The shots penetrated the cloud and hit. Nothing. He stood up and walked into the cloud. His troops followed. The bombs were no longer emitting gas, so the cloud was slowly starting to disperse. And through the thinning gas, he could see that the only people outside the buildings were his troops. And then, all hell broke loose. H2Z 118 PAL Underground Year 3, Day 12, 1026. What Ga 25H knew and Dr. 28 did not was that PAL had originally been an illegal still. And that, as a result of that, there were several tunnels underneath the town. And the current town had been built on top of an older version of the town that had burned down several years ago. Except the basements had survived. Finally, there were several maintenance rooms for the local sewer and the electricity grid. The result was an underground labyrinth, but Ga 25H knew exactly how to navigate it, and he was leading Colonel Young and his people through away from the town. "Won't this get you into trouble?" Young asked. "No, if they arrest me, the still will shut down and that will cause riots all over the place," Ga 25H said. "Plus, they would have to admit that they were in the town to begin with, which is clearly against the rules, and anything regarding the Stargates is classified at the highest levels. The average citizen barely knows that they exist. He paused as he turned a corner. The last thing would want is to attract attention to them. Playing games with the higher-ups. Like I said, I am not their biggest fan. Why do I have a feeling that you are not the only one in PAL who feels that way? Because you are right, I have been playing games, GA25H said. And I've been gathering people who have the right skills and who agree with me about our leadership. PAL is a harbor for the rebellious. Of course, there is only such we can do. They turned another corner. But I had to start somewhere. They reached the end of the tunnel. There was a heavy wooden door, which GA25H opened to reveal a stone stair that was covered in sand. GA25H pushed one of the bricks next to the stairs, and the structure turned into a slope, causing the sand to slide into the tunnel. He pushed the brick again, and the stairs moved back into place. Then he led the way up the stairs. Scott was surprised to see that they were only 50 meters from the Stargate. Tilda, how come we didn't see this? Tilda, he looked around and saw that the entrance was hidden by several shrubs and a patch of long grass. They made their way towards the gate. Rush took out the gate remote and began the dialing sequence. GA25H watched as the gate did its job, then whistled at the wormhole formed. Temporary subspace wormhole, he said, looking at the event horizon. Takes you apart at the molecular level, transmits you to another ring where you are put together again. Does it hurt? No, it doesn't hurt, Scott said, and you can tell all of that by just looking at the gate. Well, we might spend several nights doing some unauthorized research on the ring, GA25H said, before turning to Young. Like I said, PAL is a home for the rebellious, Commander, and we are playing for all the marbles. Get out of here and make as few stops as possible, Commander. And prepare for a running firefight. Young nodded and led the team through the Stargate. As he made his way out of the gate room, he thought about what he had learned on the planet. They were in hostile space, which would make resupplying harder. And it would only be a matter of time before they tried to attack Chaser the old-fashioned way. So the game was now truly afoot. 11 Ashes and Fallout. Spira Bridge Year 3, Day 50, 1430. Levine had briefed Vale and Cadman when they had returned to the ship. Vale had left Cadman and Levine to oversee things, while he went to write his report on Moon 1 and their findings there. While the team was still exploring Tango 1, Cadman and Levine and the rest of the people on the bridge were studying the other asteroids with the obelisks. You are right, Cadman said. Each is bigger than the previous one. And look at the chemical composition, Levine said. I'm no scientist, but even I can see that each one is more complex. Bigger and more complex. That all lines up with the practice ground theory, Porter said. What do you make of this technology the team reported about? Cadman made her way from the flight control to Science 1, where Porter was sitting. The team had reported their findings over the radio, while also sending back several photos. Cadman looked at the readings on the science console, which were far more extensive than the ones on the flight control console. Well, it's clearly not one of the races we've encountered so far, Cadman began, which makes sense. The only known race we know to have visited this place was the Order, and why would the Order establish an outpost this far outside civilized space? They wouldn't, Porter said. Okay, enough theories, Cadman began. Tell the team they have 5 more minutes, then I want them get back aboard. The Colonel wants to go back into FTL at 1500 hours. I want to get some closer scans of the other asteroids with obelisks before then. Yes, ma'am, Levine said. Levine opened a channel and contacted Haley and her team. Spira Briefing Room Year 3, Day 67, 1207. It had been 17 days since they had left Sector 3325 behind. Yesterday, they had received a report that they had the war between the Jinako and Nakai, which had been brewing for more than a year, had finally erupted. This meant that the Nakai Central Authority was no longer in the race for destiny. Even if they won the war, they would be busy rebuilding their civilization. But the new rebels Nakai had relocated all the people they would be able to. And they were worried about the Jinako coming for them next, so they wanted destiny. The IOA believed that they needed the ancient technology to upgrade their defenses. Tilda great, as if we don't have enough to content with, Tilda Vale thought. It was a good thing that they upgraded the hydroponics bays, because the planets they had visited since leaving Sector 3325 had been rather harsh. Tilda and no more signs of the Zavaris. Tilda they had delivered a thick report on both Moon 1 and Tango 1 a week after leaving the sector. But there was nothing new since then. Vale was sitting at the briefing room, reading the latest from reports from Colonel Young when Spira dropped out of FTL. 2 seconds later, Alec Coulson walked into the room. "What have we got?" Vale asked. "There are 4 gates in range," Coulson said. "One is looking like a good place to stock up on water." "Okay, let's see what the Malpi has to say," Vale said as he got up. "Hopefully, we'll have better luck than last time." Coulson nodded as the two of them walked out of the briefing room. The last mission had been to H3K094, and that planet has been home to some very nasty predators, so the whole team had ended up running for the puddle jumper. In fact, even once they had reached the craft, it had been a very close call. Several members of the crew had ended up in the infirmary. Chaser Gate Room Year 3, Day 67, 1207. Nicholas Rush watched as the Kino went through the event horizon. The ship and crew's current status was a good news, bad news situation. The good news was that Chaser was now only 1 or 2 days behind Destiny. It fluctuated a bit, but that was the average time gap they had managed to lock down. The bad news was they were still in Hal'Iry space. This made collection resource considerably harder. They hadn't lost anybody yet, but there had been several skirmishes with their ground forces. Furthermore, they had successfully identified the technology that Spira had found on the asteroid they had named Tango 1 as Hal'Iry. This proved that the reptilian species had traveled as far Sector 3325, but that was something for them to research later. For now, he had to worry about H4A701. They had detected a beacon in orbit of the planet, which had taken some time to translate. It said that the planet was off-limits to the Hal'Iry, and that was why Rush wanted to take a closer look at it. He made his way to the Kino readings console. The atmosphere was breathable, and there was no sign of radiation. Rush hit several keys, but there was no sign of any obvious hazard. Next to him, Colonel Young was also studying the readings. The team would consist of Young, Rush, Volker, Chloe Armstrong, Illy Wallace, James, Greer, and Varro. Camille, Ray, and TJ would be running things on Chaser while they were away. "Let's go." Young was the first through the gate, with Rush being right behind him. Varro went through last, and then the wormhole disengaged. As it did, Johansson turned to Adam Brody, who was manning the dialing computer. "I want hourly status reports," she said. "You got it." Johansson took out her radio and contacted Sergeant Barnes. She knew that this world was officially off-limits, but she was not taking any chances, so she ordered Barnes to assemble a team to secure the gate room. Tilda, just in case there are any nasty surprises waiting on 701. Tilda, she had just done so when the ship's alarm sounded, so she headed for the bridge. Spira Gate Room Year 3, Day 67, 1215. Vale was looking at the readings on H5D 228. The planet had a toxic atmosphere, but nothing that the spacesuits couldn't handle. They had considered using the puddle jumper, but the atmosphere was corrosive to the ship's hull. The suits, however, would not be affected. As for why they were headed through the gate, the Malpi was telling them that there was some kind of anomaly about 300 meters from their potential arrival point. At first, 228 had seemed like a useless rock with a toxic atmosphere, and temperature was minus 70 degrees Celsius. But then, the MALP had detected an area where the temperature was only minus 5 Celsius. But the probe could not tell them why, and that was what they wanted to figure out. So NR1 was putting on the spacesuits. "Time to test the adjuster circuit," G-Al said as he put on his helmet. "This is the first time somebody not human is using the suits." "Well, if the circuit works, they should be one-size-fits-all," Tizalo said. "Sort of." G-Al pushed a button and the suit slowly shrunk to fit him. Then Tizalo pushed the same button and his suit adjusted as well. Porter was already in her suit, so they were waiting for Vale. The colonel put on his helmet and then activated his radio. =/backslash== okay, people, here we go. =/backslash=. =/backslash=, yes, sir. =/backslash=, Tizalo said. Vale led the way through the gate. He had a feeling that this was going to be an interesting trip. H4A 701 Field Year 3, Day 67, 12:25. 701 was actually a nice planet. So far, they hadn't run into any nasty critters or lethal radiation. Instead, it was a wooded planet with 2 suns. The planet was further from the suns than Earth was from her own star, but because there were 2 of them, the planet was still habitable. Rush and Ali were in the front of the team. Ali was holding a Kino remote and checking the readings. He had sent the Kino ahead to make sure that there weren't any nasty surprises waiting for them. Tilda so far, so good. Tilda he had barely completed the thought when the remote beeped. "Colonel," Ali began, "we have a town up ahead, but no life signs." "What about bodies?" Rush asked. "Nothing so far, but the place is very overgrown." The town was a ruin, with large chunks of the buildings having already fallen down, and what was still standing was covered in vines and other plants. From the looks of it, this happened a while ago. So the bodies could have decayed in the time since. The Kino reached a building in the exact center of town. Worryingly, it appeared to be both intact and totally free of overgrowth. Ali had a bad feeling about what this meant, and he also knew that there was only one way for them to find out. Tilda were going to have to go in there. Tilda so, he looked at Young. "What did you find?" Young asked. "One building, intact and free of overgrowth," Ali said. "Right in the middle of town. We're going to have to go in there." "Correct me if I'm wrong," Chloe began, "but the last time something like this happened, didn't Dr. McKay end up blowing up a solar system?" Young gave her a look. "What? I've been reading up on Atlantis." "She has a point," Ali said. "That doesn't change the fact the colonel is right," Rush said. "Whatever is in there could pose a significant threat to the ship." He paused, while gazing towards the settlement. "We're going to have to deal with it, one way or another." Young nodded, and they continued on their way. Soon, they would reach the settlement, and then they would have to deal with the fallout of whatever had happened here. H5D 228 Desert Year 3, Day 67, 12:28. 228 might have a toxic atmosphere, but it was pretty. As the planet's lone sun rose above the horizon, it was turning the atmosphere into a rainbow of colors. It also revealed that the anomaly was located at a deep gorge in the surface of the planet. As they approached it, it had become clear that this was not a natural formation. Instead, it was a square quarry that went straight down. As he looked over the edge, Tizalo saw that there was no bottom, but a plain of water instead. "Tilda, I wonder why it hasn't frozen." Tilda looking around, he spotted a flight of stairs that zigzagged down towards the water. Colonel Vale led the way to it, with Tizalo taking up the rear. "Tilda, here we go, Tilda." The stairs were made from some kind of metal. As he made his way down the first flight of stairs, Vale passed through a force field. The rest of team followed, before Vale activated his radio. =/backslash=, this is what the MALP read. =/backslash=, he began. =/backslash=, it just couldn't make it out, because the atmosphere was too thick. Equals/backslash equals. Equals/backslash equals, it's like we're walking in soup. Equals/backslash equals, Porter said. Equals/backslash equals true. Equals/backslash equals, Yal said. Equals/backslash equals, but the force field appears to keep it out. The atmosphere is clear underneath. Equals/backslash equals, he turned to Porter. Equals/backslash equals, is it breathable? Allison. Equals/backslash equals. Equals/backslash equals, it appears to be, but we have no idea what kind of bacteria and viruses are in the atmosphere. So I recommend keeping the suits on. Equals/backslash equals. Equals/backslash equals, okay. Let's see if we can find any signs of inhabitants. Equals/backslash equals. They continued their way down the stairs. The walls of the quarry appeared to be smooth at first glance, but Alo could see that. Well, whatever they were mining here, they took it away in chunks. He could see lines on the walls. As they headed down, he realized that Al was right, and that the atmosphere was indeed clear. Finally, they reached the bottom of the stairs. The problem was that there was no way to tell how deep the water was. Equals/backslash equals, now what? Equals/backslash equals, Alo asked. Equals/backslash equals, well, only one thing I can think of. Equals/backslash equals, Vale said. He stepped off the platform and ended standing in about 5 centimeters of water. The bottom of the quarry was gloomy, so Vale, and then others, activated the light on his weapon. Using the extra lights to get a better look at the place, Porter spotted a rusty metal door in one of the walls. It was slightly bigger than an average humanoid and came with a handle. Vale nodded, and they made their way towards the door. The colonel gave several hand signals which the team had been learning for the last couple of days, and Porter grabbed the door handle, while Yal took up a position to the left, and Alo went to the right. Vale took the middle and began counting down using his fingers. When he reached 0, Porter yanked the door open. Equals/backslash equals, bloody. Equals/backslash equals, Vale said. There was no way to tell what the room had once been, but now it was a mass grave. It was clear that whoever the people had been, they had not been Hal'Iry. The remains were dressed in rags and they were handcuffed, with their legs being in chains as well. The walls were scared and black, making it clear that these people had died in a fire. Vale had the feeling that they were standing in the ashes of the other races of this galaxy. 12 dark secrets uncovered. H4A 701 Settlement Year 3, Day 67, 1242. The building that had survived whatever had happened here did not match the construction style of the ruins. The broken buildings were brick and mortar, whereas the survivor was steel and glass. As Illy had seen on the Kino footage, all the ruins were overgrown. But they could all clearly see that their destination was untouched. There were some kind of symbols on the outside of the structure as well. It's like somebody added this place as an afterthought, Volker said. That afterthought might have killed everybody on this planet, Varro said. So, how do we find out what happened here? Volker said. Illy, Young said, send in the Kino. Nodding, Illy steered the alien device towards the building. The doors wouldn't open, but one of the windows was broken. So Illy used that window to get the flying camera ball inside. At first glance, the building looked like a hospital or clinic. But then the Kino flew into a room where several Hal'Iry were strapped to beds, and they were covered in nasty-looking, purple boils. Illy also noticed that room could only be opened from the outside. It's a lab, Rush said, a biological lab. The kind that has been outlawed on Earth for decades, James said. They were making weapons. So something broke containment and wiped out this village, Varro said. That's the most likely scenario, Rush said. We need to get out of here, Illy said. Illy, turn off the Kino, Young said. We're going to have to leave it behind, otherwise we risk contamination. He turned to the others. Greer, Varro, take point, we're leaving. I still recommend a day or two of isolation once we get back, Rush began, just to be on the safe side. We'll radio ahead and set it up, Young said. With Greer and Varro leading the way, the group headed out. They reached the border of the settlement, which Ellie now realized was marked by metal poles. Mounted on the side of these poles that faced the town were blue, elliptical lights. They were about halfway up the poles and the size of a football. These had been off when the team had made their way into the town. That's why we didn't notice them, Ellie thought. Greer and Varro reached the poles, only to walk into a force field. It knocked them to the ground. Vanessa, James, and Rush helped them to their feet. Varro aimed his weapon at one of the lights, which Ellie figured was actually an emitter, and fired 3 shots. Alas, the force field also protected the emitter's slash pole. All 3 shots were blocked. Okay, this could be a problem, Volker said. It's a Hal'Iry countermeasure, and it probably extends all around the settlement, Rush said. We probably triggered it going in, Young said. So, what do we do now? Chloe asked. That was the big question that they were now facing. With a bit of luck, Chaser would check in on them soon, and they had enough food and water for a couple of days, so they were good in the short term. It was the long term that was the problem. Looking back towards the lab, Ellie got the feeling that he knew where they would end up heading. H5D 228 Tunnel Year 3, Day 67, 1530. The team had done a circuit of the quarry, staying close to the wall. They had found several more rooms, but these had all been mostly empty. What little remained, however, had painted a picture. The quarry had clearly been a major mining operation. And the rooms combined to form a complex that had housed the workforce. Porter and G-Yal had discovered a tunnel that connected them. The only room not tied in was the one where they had found the remains. At the moment, NR-1 was exploring a larger tunnel that branched off from the room connecting 1. Porter and G-Yal were in the lead, while Vale and T-Zalo covered the rear. Where do you think this goes? G-Yal asked. I have no idea, Porter began. But whatever is at the end, it's going to be far outside the quarry, and the air is clear, so something is keeping the atmosphere from the surface out. They reached a corner in the tunnel. After they turned said corner, they found themselves at a pair of heavy metals door on rails. It took both them, but them managed to roll one of the doors aside. MP5 at the ready, G-Yal was the first to step into the room beyond. It was a large, round room with a roof that could iris open. There was machinery lining the wall, along with plenty of tools. I think this is where they did maintenance on ships serving the quarry. So, it's a fancy garage. Too bad it's empty, G-Yal began. I get the feeling that this planet has been abandoned for quite a while. Still, even an outdated Hal'Iry ship would have told us a bunch about their technology. Let's make sure we're not missing anything, Vale said as he joined them. You're the boss, G-Yal said. The team set to examining the room. It was T-Zalo who noticed a passage behind one of the sections with tools. Following it, he ended up in a small supply room. At the back of this room, behind a workbench, was a section of wall that seemed off to him. He pulled the workbench aside and examined the section. It's not a wall. He pushed against the section and it slid aside. It's a hatch. And beyond that hatch was another tunnel. Colonel, I've found something. =/==, we'll be right there. =/==. T-Zalo waited for the rest of the team to arrive, then made his way down the tunnel. It was narrow, so he had to get through on all fours, which was not easy in the spacesuit, but all 4 of them made it, suits intact. The space beyond was dark. But even with just the light of their flashlights, it was clearly not part of the Hal'Iry constructions on the planet. Instead, it appeared to have been a collection of caves. This was obvious because there were stalactites and stalagmites in range of their flashlights. They could also see that the caves had once been separated by natural walls, but that these had been removed. Somebody did some remodeling, Vale said. And expanding, Porter began. They connected the caves and made them bigger, and then, she pointed at a constructed wall with her flashlight, used the pieces of rock to build that wall, which I figure used to be the entrance. That explains why this place is not flooded with the surface atmosphere. Boss, Jiao said, while pointing at a spot next to the entrance. Is it me, or does that look like a light switch? Vale looked at the spot and saw that it was indeed a light switch, so he flicked it. There was a pause, and then he heard the sound of a generator spinning up. He turned back to the cave complex to see several electronic lights spring to life. They revealed a shanty town made out of wood, metal, fabric, stone, and other materials. Basically, any materials the locals could get their hands on. There were only a few electronic lamps, but Vale spotted other light sources as well. Candles, oil lamps, and even bioluminescent moss, Porter said. These people got really creative about lighting this place. Let's take a closer look, Vale said. They made their way into the town. Vale took out a gas lighter and began lighting the oil lamps and candles as they passed, leaving a trail of light. The town was empty. There was crude furniture inside the shacks that made up the town, but there were no personal items. No clothes, no food, no corpses, Porter said. We're missing something, Vale said. A hidden shanty town cloaked in the dark. What is this place about? Survival, a female voice began. This place is about survival. The team turned to see a group of Hal'Iry. They were armed with bows and arrows, which were aimed at the team. Vale could see that these were not adults, but children. A young Hal'Iry female who was clearly in charge had been the one who had spoken. She was holding a sword, which she was pointing at Vale. We're not here to threaten that, Vale said. I'll be the judge of that, the female said. Take them away. The children led the team to a collection of cages. Vale knew that they were on the clock and that they could shoot their way out of this situation. But that was not the kind of man he was. The children took their weapons and locked them in the cages. Vale sat down on the floor. Tilda, time to earn your paycheck, Mark. Tilda, he began plotting his next move.